You wrote a brilliant NOMA Mag article that basically talks about, Earth's possible futures, and then you just kind of mentioned that hope. And so I'll just read basically one little paragraph, and then hopefully we can kind of riff on that.
Okay.
Thus, fears of terrestrial apocalypse animate pursuits of life and living beyond Earth. But conversely, imagining how life, including human life, might exist in an extraterrestrial context and seeing the planet from outer space has driven imaginations of Earth's possible futures, both hopeful, course-correcting pathways, but also escapist fantasies of extraplanetary colonization. So it seems like it's not exactly a utopia dystopia thing, but it's very easily put up into that. In the course-correcting pathways, I see as almost like a regenerative Earth. Everyone's working for the regeneration of Earth, and Earth's happy and healthy and everything, and humans and animals and et cetera. But then also escapist fantasies of extraplanetary colonization. I mean, that's like the plot of every sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
So how do we kind of utilize something like COVID, something like that is history like that, as a way to shape our kind of future? Because as you were talking about before, you can almost simulate what, if we kept running this history forward, what would it mean? Mm-hmm. And then now we can kind of see in our COVID things of what would that mean in some types of areas of lockdown or vaccine passports or other types of things that come up with COVID, how we deal with work from home. So I just kind of wanted to kind of riff on that, and then it's coming from the possible future. So they're both hopeful in a sense. It just depends on which side you're on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks for. It's always funny to hear someone read back something you wrote.
Oh, sure.
It can either be good or bad. I was like, yeah, it sounds pretty good. The point of that article is, my goal for the article was to call attention to something that I've noticed both in my work in the archives and my anthropological field work with scientists who search for life beyond Earth, is that the objects that they seek don't yet exist, and it's unclear if, how, and will they ever might. So, right, I'm talking about microbes, on some exoplanet, or perhaps some kind of like oceanic creature like below, the ice sheets of
stuff. Ice sheets, okay.
Enceladus,
sure.
Something like that. We really don't know, but because we don't know, my understanding, or it's just something I've noticed in my research, is that the imagination of planets beyond, of worlds beyond, of beings beyond, of life forms that we can't even dream of, because they exist in an imaginary, they tend to kind of loop back. They create this kind of reflexivity to an invitation to understand how we operate on Earth. So, what I meant by kind of escapist fantasies of colonization is this impossible dream that going to Mars, we would leave behind, all of the social ills that we have here on Earth, right? I mean, there could be some kind of, extraplanetary pandemic, on Mars. And I get frustrated that those fantasies are often just kind of reinforce, or maybe not reinforce, they recapitulate a lot of oppressive social structures on Earth, like capitalism, ableism, and for instance, Elon Musk's, if you have seen his kind of fantasy about what the colony on Mars would look like, it's just a recreation of suburbia.
Or even worse, I mean, and that's the best kind of situation for me. And coming from my grandparents and coal miners, like that just, you're just talking about scripts, and like basically you're talking about the Pinkertons, and you're talking about like all that stuff in the back in the day where, Elon Musk has already said, out of his own words, that it would not be a democracy on Mars. You know what I mean? He's already said in his own words that it would be through debt servitude, that basically the admission tickets, to go would be so expensive that you're going to have to work. But then he said, well, there's going to be plenty of jobs on Mars. So again, it's like, it's very interesting to see that that's part of our future, if you will.
Right.
You know?
Right.
I'll say another thing out of the article. These threats have in different ways revealed how actions are never self-contained in global network systems. Each moment's particular planetary anxieties, pathogenic, climate, nuclear, have animated and informed scientists' pursuit of extraterrestrial life. So maybe that's a set for extraterrestrial life, but another thing that you said is basically through the coronavirus's march across the world and its disregard for political borders, the environmental movement is not really, gotten so... Well, the environmental movement highlighted the fragility of the planet's entangled life, and the Cold War ushered the concept of global nuclear disaster. So basically what you're saying is anticipations of worlds beyond Earth, places that might be or might be made to be habitable, are made possible by conceiving of Earth as both threatened and interconnected. Mm-hmm. So interconnected, I think we all know, globalism, etc. But then now it's almost like this dystopic kind of over our heads, a threatened kind of thought process makes us think about aliens in a different way. Is that kind of how it plays out to a layman, I guess you could say?
Yeah, I think so. Right. So it's this exactly like you mentioned. So going back to kind of the Cold War example, in the archives, right, there was a group of civilian scientists who worked within NASA, which was a really political organization, sure. Right? But the group of civilian scientists were interested in finding life beyond Earth, and they were interested in working with Soviet scientists. They wanted to do everything that they could to find what I describe as a universal theory of biology. So if the Darwinian conception of life illuminates evolution, right? They hoped that finding life beyond Earth, hopefully on Mars, their best bet is that they would find it on Mars, would reveal life's origins. So
like a rubric of sorts, right?
Yeah. And if they found life on Mars, they imagined it would give them kind of a blueprint for the kinds of life, a universal theory of biology by which they could use as kind of a map to find life even beyond our solar system. Right. And they thought about this as a very as a really kind of hopeful endeavor. They wanted to sketch out a universal theory of biology, which still doesn't exist. And so they were really kind of concerned that this like Cold War posturing or nuclear disaster would prevent them from finding this like universal theory of biology, for right. instance. Then with climate change and kind of this environmental consciousness that I think originated in the 70s, let's say, which continues, which has only grown
right.
in concern since then, the interconnectedness of the Earth, what maybe we call the biosphere, what happens over here, affects the global climate, the planetary climate. That makes us realize that Earth is very precious and very fragile, and I think should serve as kind of an alarm to how we think about inhabiting other worlds, right? God, to go back to Elon Musk, right, wanting to like nuke the poles in order to like heat up the planet. NASA said that this won't work, but that kind of like brazen disregard for kind of the like a planetary climate on Mars is directly related to kind of like the ignoring kind of a planetary climate on Earth. And so in that way, Mars and Earth are in kind of like in conversation with, or our imaginations of like what we want to do here on Earth is like in direct conversation with like ways that we could inhabit Mars. Sure.
And then that's very interesting with how we see that, because even, I don't want to get too brazen in my thing about Elon Musk, but it seems like it's almost psychopathic thinking to then go to Mars without kind of, I don't want to say fixing Earth, but you know what I mean? Like we kind of need to make sure we're good until we go there, I guess you could say, or at least do the things that he's talking about, civilizations and all this other jazz.
Just to jump in, right? I'm often asked, like, would you go to space? Or there's this argument that you kind of alluded to, which is, why don't we kind of fix Earth before worrying about, spending billions of dollars going to Mars or even just outer space exploration, which
is definitely the end of the argument. I don't want to put myself on the end of that, but yes, like I'm with you on this.
Well, I actually don't buy it. I think that learning about our universe and exploring the cosmos and pursuing science beyond Earth has wonderful consequences for how we understand our own world, and kind of the deep thinking required to dismantle systems of oppression should be done in conjunction with, instead of.
Right.
Do you know?
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
I kind of want to think about how it's almost like even in science fiction how we think about social systems. I mean, the Red Mars or the Mars trilogy, Kim Stanley Robinson, all those kind of things. It's like, well, there's a many different ways that we could skin this cat, but it's like, in what ways do we need to make sure that, because like I agree with you in some sense, like space, the stars are where we need Ad Astra, everything like that, but then the frontiers mentality, I think as well, I think frontier is a very like, I guess a bridge word from the colonialization and stuff like that to then also unbridled curiosity, which I'm totally for, but like how it happens from theory to practice is kind of like where that,
so
where the money's made.
I'm glad that you mentioned this. So something that I just found so fascinating is that scientists who search for life beyond Earth sometimes invoke colonial imagery or like colonial rhetoric, but in this kind of twist, they emplace themselves as like natives to Earth, and in a direct comparison to kind of like Cortez or Christopher Columbus, like coming to Earth, but in this case, like the aliens are the Columbuses, and we hope that they would be better than the original version. So this is all to say that I think Indigenous studies and kind of Indigenous knowledge of the world, we need to be really kind of aware, and those perspectives are absolutely essential when we think about inhabiting other worlds. And I mean, to get back to your previous question, how do you not make mistakes of the past? Like being aware of a history of colonialism as we kind of work to go off Earth is absolutely essential in doing it with a sense of care and a sense of hope and a sense of inclusion.
Absolutely.
And directed by kind of like an environmental consciousness of preservation and care and respect.
Right, and that's a totally different kind of aspect than like, hey, let's just highest bidder, get to going on a rocket.
Yeah.
So we won't get too far, but this is great. So one thing, I guess we can transition into kind of your dissertation in a little bit, but let's kind of set the stage a little bit. We've talked a little bit about SETI and Breakthrough Listen, Jill Tarter. So SETI, search for extraterrestrial intelligence, but as you said, that they're kind of now focused for search for extraterrestrial technology, right? So more techno-signatures kind of things. Most of our listeners know about the overview effect, that was kind of basically my first essay. That's why I wanted to, start this whole shebang, was that kind of realization. And one of the things that I kind of was the biggest realization was not the things I said in my essay that we have a paper thin atmosphere, like it's hanging in a void. But one of the coolest things that I saw was the Earthrise photo was like the first time that the Earth had seen itself. You know what I mean? And so not to get too grand philosophical, but I mean, the overview effect is basically the effect, the psychological effect that astronauts have when they see Earth from outer space. And there's only been, 500 or so in the history of human species, around 10 billion or so people. So not a lot of people have experienced this. But every single one, when they come back home, to Earth, they have this grand kind of way of thinking now. They have this grand way of going about the world, and they basically have an overview effect about seeing the world. And so just wanted to kind of see your effects on like our effects through the telescopes of looking out, and then now all of a sudden we have something that's looking back. How does that kind of change our historical kind of lens? You know, how does that change from us now looking out into the cosmos to then now us looking back through to us? But it's not, I don't want to say the cosmos looking back at us, because I guess it sounds too corny, but I guess any thoughts about the overview effect and riffing on that? You know?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, that image, I am really using this word deliberately, is iconic.
Okay, yeah, for sure.
That word
Time magazine, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and there have been different versions of that image. So there's the Earthrise, which actually I'm not sure if you know, but the astronauts on Apollo 8, when they first saw Earth from afar, you know, it was the story that they tell is just amazing. It's like this performance and process of reorientation, right? Like that's the Gulf of Mexico, like that's Florida, where we just
like
launched.
Scales are totally different.
Totally different, and they're leaving the atmosphere, and they're going toward the moon. And that's Africa, and that's the Sahara, and you zoom out and you zoom out, and then I mean the Earthrise photo shows this desolate, barren, bleak, gray, the lunar surface, and then the Earth appearing to rise. So it completely inverts kind of our view from Earth, like looking out into the moon.
I didn't even see that juxtaposition, because that's very true. You know, you definitely see a little bit of the barren wasteland. Like there's nothing. All it is asteroidal impacts. You know
right.
what I mean? And
right.
Then you have a ball, the marble of life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So actually, it's not. I don't think that this is that known, but that image was actually rotated 90 degrees.
Right. I did know that. Yeah.
Yeah. But you're right. I mean, the effect is the same. And then there's the blue marble image, which was the whole Earth, right? And then there was the pale blue dot, which Voyager took, that Carl Sagan kind of facilitated, and it shows just a tiny, tiny Earth, like in the vast cosmos. So you get these kind of different landscapes, different kind of senses of scale, and they all, as you mentioned, evoke this sense of wonder. Right. Feelings of preciousness for Earth. And one of the astronauts, I can't remember who it was, I mean, his sense was that it was both something weird happened, which is that seeing kind of Earth, or everything that he loved and cared for, kind of was not visible, right? You could see the mountains, like you could see the desert, you could see the ocean, you could see the clouds, but his wife and his family, everything that he cared about was on this kind of island in space as they were going farther and farther away from it. But the fact of not seeing it both like endeared them even more to him, this center of liveliness in the universe. Just something else I think is really interesting too is that Heidegger, the philosopher, he had the opposite reaction to kind of the feeling that you're describing, which is that kind of the disappearance of technology, what humans make, that you can't see, like roads and bridges and buildings and kind of everything made by human hands, had this deeply psychological effect that for him was the terrifying and the sublime. So people have these really different reactions to seeing Earth from the cosmos, right? But illuminated by the sun, glowing in blue, shrouded in these white clouds. I mean, it really is magical, I think.
I like the words that you used: magical, terrifying, and sublime. Mm-hmm. So we'll leave it at those three. That's good. That's good.
Well, the sublime too, just really quick, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in philosophy, the sublime also refers to kind of the disappearance of the ego. So you stare into the maw of the abyss, and so sublime to me invokes this kind of thought that we could all be snuffed out, right? And that so Earth is even more dear because we're staring kind of apocalypse in the face, right?